So you found our podcast. We are Mind Beyond the Mission. This is a podcast about veterans and their families, and specifically mental health. What goes on in our lives, what goes on in our heads. We're not talking to you as doctors or professionals. We're talking to you about living with it and what it's like. Ryan McKenna, 19 years in the Canadian Forces. I'm joined by my partner, Laryssa Lamrock.
Veteran family member. I'm a proud military brat. My husband served in the military, proud military mom. And we're really excited about this podcast to delve into issues that are important to the veteran and family community.
So join us as we talk about mental health from the perspective of veterans and their families.
Well, here we are again for another episode of Mind Beyond the Mission. We're completely virtual this time, Brian. I think last time you and I were able to sit down in a studio in Ottawa, but here we are again virtually, and we are joined by another guest. And I'm pretty excited about our conversation topic today.
Yeah, it's interesting. If I look back 25 some odd years ago and my social circle, I was surrounded by infantrymen, surrounded by people going through courses, corporals everywhere as we were on our JNCO course. And I look around now and I'm surrounded by people that are on healing journeys. I'm surrounded by painters, songwriters, artists, but it's the same people, right? And that's actually one of the things we're here to talk about today is how did this group of people that were, joining for everything that was in the brochure, they wanted to repel, they wanted to kick doors, they wanted to serve Queen and country at the time. And, now they're on some pretty different endeavors. We're going to get onto that.
Yeah, so I'm pleased to introduce Ryan Hawkyard. He served 20 years in the Canadian Armed Forces and completed 3 tours in Afghanistan. During that time, Ryan was diagnosed with posttraumatic stress and was encouraged to try acting as a therapeutic outlet. After his service, Ryan introduced improv-based workshops to soldiers in the arts, using creativity and performance to help veterans process trauma, build trust, and foster healing. So Ryan brings firsthand military experience, of course, as a veteran to our conversation today, and also a passion for the arts, using storytelling, performance to guide fellow veterans on their recovery and reintegration journey, which I find fascinating. And Ryan, I first met you a few years ago already. We were surprised at how many years have passed in an event, and it was something that was very moving for me and for my husband who joined me, who's a veteran, to see veterans expressing themselves through different artistic means. So there were skits, there was poetry, there was photography. Yeah. So what brought you there?
Growing up, I didn't really have any interest in, any artistic endeavors. So my thing was get out of high school as quickly as possible, join the Army. And I did that. And then when I was dealing with the fallout from my diagnosis, and I was under the care of my mental health team for quite a while. I still am. And at one point, my doctor had suggested to me, you might want to try something out of your comfort zone because everything you're doing is very military-like in practice. So that's where I fell into, okay, well, I'm just going to try something that I know nothing about. And I signed up for an improv class. And that's really where I got started. The idea of having, there's no failure was such a foreign concept to me. You show up with a bunch of people and you just, on the outside looking in, it's just like, oh, they're just playing games and horsing around. But there is an element to that, that element of play and being childlike in your approach to things, but also just being able to let go and not worried about any kind of judgment on you for what you're going to say or what you're going to do, right? So I found it was very supportive. And from there, I got into more traditional acting classes. I started taking some here in Toronto with Second City, and I really liked it. And I thought, hey, this is something that to go along with what I'm doing on the healing side. This is something that's been very helpful to me. My wife had said to me, hey, seems to be working for you. You should keep it up. So I started looking out and seeing what was around available to vets in the GTA specifically. And, there was nothing catered towards performing arts. There was like Guitars for Vets. That was a program that was running for a while. But I found a bunch in the States, of course, and in the UK. So at the same time, I had met some people from an organization called the Roland Gossage Foundation, and they had brought over a play from the UK called Soldier On, which is like, it's pretty meta. It's a play about a group of veterans getting together to put on a play about PTSD. And watching it, I was like, oh man, like this is exactly what I go through. And, I got to actually see myself in a lot of the characters. So I went and approached them and, we started getting to talking, and they were also looking at establishing, some kind of creative arts program. So we joined forces, and this is just before the pandemic started. We put together a grant through Veterans Affairs. It got approved, and then we had 3 years of a creative arts project that we were running here in Toronto and also in Kingston. Pretty much what we were doing was we started with improv theater specifically, and then we put on our own professional production of a new play that was based on the experiences of Canadians in Afghanistan. It was called Tunnel at the End of the Light. And from there, we started to get more into what's known as devised theater.
I'm hearing you speak, and I'm envisioning someone walking on a stage towards a microphone, and I'm feeling vulnerable. I remember, if I compare it to the feeling of vulnerability, which is not one that I like, it's, coming home. Before I used to walk out the door, walk out of my vehicle in an army sense, it was always check surroundings and put on a whole bunch of gear. TAC vest is on top of ballistic protection and all these things. And so I remember coming home and not having anything to put on and feeling like, where's my stuff? Where's my protective turtle shell that I'm used to walking around in? And I'm trying to figure out, is that the same kind of vulnerability when you would say walk towards a microphone, or in the improv, you suddenly realize you're on and you don't know what words are about to come out of your mouth 10 seconds from now?
To get up in front of a group of strangers and be given this scenario, and you just have to be okay with just letting go and doing whatever comes into your head, that does seem a little out of the wheelhouse. But I would also say that, 90% of the time when I was in uniform and I was put into these roles, I would be, as a master corporal, I would get thrown in front of a bunch of officers, especially overseas when I was running an intelligence cell, and said, hey, listen, you got to brief these guys on the battle space. And I don't, I just have what I have there. So I really have to come off the top of my head. So those little things that I never really thought about really helped in that realm. I was able to adapt pretty quickly to being able to just, think on my feet and being fun. You teach on a course, and you if you taught on a course and you're just listing off laundry lists all day long and trying to knock this information into truth. So I would always try to make it a little more engaging. So I'd try and find the humor in things, because nobody likes an instructor who just gets up there and reads, right? So it kind of lends itself to it.
Right. But when they told you in the Army, improvise, adapt, and overcome, I don't think they meant go to the improv.
Yeah, no, not at all. Not at all.
Here's a prop, do something with it.
Yeah.
Ryan, I'm curious to know, okay, so that sounds like some self-care and socialization. I can identify those types of things with, what you did with theater and such. But across all the arts, what would you describe the direct line is, or is there a direct line to your recovery? Were there things that translated from that experience into your recovery process?
I think for myself, one thing that really stood out for it was, one, I need to get out of my comfort zone. I was very solid in being around military people, talking the lingo, going to military-based things, reading military books, all this stuff. I just kept doing the same thing over and over again. So I was stuck in this mindset. And especially when I started to look at, well, my career is about to end, what's going to happen next? And how do I reflect back on that and be like, okay, well, it wasn't just service. It was my life, right? And this, doing things that were creative helped me understand why more so, and who I was outside of just being a soldier. Those things that I joined up for changed a lot over the time. And towards the end of my career, I found myself at a crossroads where I didn't really know what I was doing anymore. And, being able to reflect on it and use things to tell that story in a creative manner was extremely beneficial to me, because then I could just be like, well, I might not be able to convey it. I could sit here for 3 hours and tell you why I joined, but why don't I try and sum it up, in a very small paragraph, and see if I can get that across to you.
I wonder, in your circumstance here, Ryan, even when you go on vacation, for example, some people ask you where you're going, others will ask what you're coming from, or what are you running away from. Is there some emotion or uncomfortable feeling that you were trying to part ways with? What was the problem that you were trying to solve?
The biggest one for me was, who was I? I joined the Army when I was 18 years old, right? So like my entire life was being a soldier. And, at 18 years old, that was really cool. But at, in my 40s, I was kind of like, well, I still got a lot of life left to live. So how am I going to take those experiences and help transform myself to the next step? I find that the things that we deal with in uniform are so foreign to most people on a base level concept. Like if you're talking about what it's like to serve in an overseas context in a combat zone, but the small things that you can take from that and you can share with other people help create that humanity, that bridge between you. People don't know what it's like to be away from your spouse for 6 months and, be under the constant threat of extreme violence, but they know what it's like to be lonely, or they know what it's like to be separated from people. So you can give them that element where, they can take that in and they can feel their own loneliness in that. And then maybe, they have a little bit more empathy when they're coming to talk about what it is that was weighing on you being in that situation.
That's bringing to mind a few things for me. And I think through my understanding of the arts is that they're interpretive and they can be subjective, and I think there's a beauty in that. And I'm going to share, I guess, just a little bit of an experience that I had that I found kind of helpful in my own journey. So when I was doing peer support, we had an activity night and we brought these little canvases from the dollar store and some paints and had a clinician walk us through as family members supporting a veteran with PTSD for us to paint a representation of one of the toughest parts of our journey supporting someone with PTSD. So we sat together and we were talking and visiting, and there was this just connection happening with people organically as we were each painting our picture. And then we were able to share, if we wanted to, the representation. The next part of the exercise was then for us, over top of that, to paint what we envisioned as our safe space. And so for me, what I noticed was that part of the difficult part of my journey became the painting, part of the painting of my safe space. They were incorporated. I didn't cover it 100%. Parts of that were still there, and that was very symbolic to me. And as we were each sharing, I would look at one of my peers' paintings and pull something different out of it. What it might have represented one thing to them, but that's where I'm kind of going with that. I think art can be a way for us to safely express what's really hard to put into words, but I think it also is a connection amongst people because they might pull part of their story out of that. So I'm curious what you've seen working with a number of veterans across the programs and initiatives that you've led. Tell me a little bit about what you've observed with them, maybe when they first came to you and when they're in those group kind of activities to maybe the end of a project or something.
I found that it's been very, it really brings people together. Like having that ability to share and be heard and not, not so much I want to be like and not be judged, but at least you don't have to worry about who's hearing it at first because the space is very contained with other vets and other family members. So people understand that already. So you're not going out there out on a limb with a group of, civilians for lack of a better term. Like when I did that was it took me a while before I could even tell people in the room I was in the military, but at least with soldiers in the arts, we were running our workshops. It was like, you already knew everybody there. So it already took that barrier away to being a little more open with what you were going through or what you were feeling about a certain topic.
As you're speaking about this, one thing that comes up for me is that if you look in the American system, the VA system, it's a hospital system. It's a full healthcare system. Ours isn't. If you look at the Australian system, it has similarities and differences from ours. You go worldwide and find, 100 plus different veteran circumstances in terms of healthcare, in terms of laws and policy and benefits. I have never run into a soldier yet that has a perfect answer to purpose, meaning, and identity when they get out of the military. It is the tie that binds. It's the struggle that binds. And it is probably the biggest thing that I went searching for. And I look at it as the mirror test, and it's also for me, my kids used to introduce me to other people. And then when someone would ask questions like, oh, Dad's in the Army, that's why he's the way he is. But when you're not in the Army anymore, why are you that way? right? Or like, why? Well, why are you different? Why are you so easy to startle? And that became even harder for them to explain, like, who is dad? And so I struggled a lot of like looking in the mirror, and it wasn't that I couldn't find any purpose. It was that I was looking in the rearview mirror. I was looking at that the best chapter of my life is behind me, and really struggling to figure out now, like, I know what looking forward looks like, but is it worth it? And how do I get there? How do I find a new meaning that doesn't dishonor that past, but is worth doing?
Yeah, totally. One thing I always go back to is like the movie The Hurt Locker,
Yeah.
which I'm not, it's a movie, whatever. But the one scene in that movie that really kind of summed it up for me was when he's in the grocery store and he's looking at the cereal, right? And he's just, you can see it in his face. He's just like, well, what am I doing? Right. So I find myself all the time asking that question, like I've worked a bunch of different jobs since I've gotten out, just small things here and there part-time. And it's hard to find something where I'm just like, this is it, this is what I'm going to put all my effort into. And I think we all struggle with that. I was out in New Brunswick for a retirement party back in November and saw, an old section commander of mine, 35 years in the military, retired, and where he's living now. And he's saying the same thing. He's like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do next. I've like got this whole life behind me, but there's so many years to go still. Right. And I think that really isolates a lot of us. So again, when I come back to it, is like the only thing that I can say for myself that's been any benefit is just being able to find creative ways to, I don't want to say process, but like bring the things that I've been holding on to out, and just be like, well, this, even if I'm not going to show it to anybody, at least it's out there. It's like if you journal every day, every day you just kind of write out whatever the first things coming into your head, you're getting those, you're not holding that in, you're getting it out there. So if purpose is ever going to come back, I have no idea, but I can at least give myself little benchmarks of things I would like to try, and at least try to express myself in ways that are going to help with that.
And there's so many unique ways out there. One that's really blown my mind is watching a program. It's been national, but started out in BC, of axe making, right? And I never thought about metalwork from an art perspective, but here they are, 10 vets gathered around a craftsman, teaching them like, this is how we're going to forge. This is how we make metal bend and move, and you can make art out of it. And as I'm watching this happen, for me, it opened my eyes to, there's probably things out there other than writing songs. Nothing wrong with writing songs. There's things out there other than painting. So what have you seen that's interested you and is maybe a newer form of art that not everyone's considering these days?
Oh, wow. I mean, I'm not too tech savvy, but the stuff with AI now is pretty wild to see what you can make just with that. Like you don't have to really have any physical talent. I'm not saying you shouldn't have any physical talent, but like to draw these ideas and create this like image just by typing some prompts into the computer and how to refine that. I think that's something that's making some pretty controversial, but some interesting things are coming from that as well. So yeah, that's one that I really am like, oh wow, I wonder where that's going to go.
It's interesting, and I will love to hear from you what words of encouragement or recommendations you might have for veterans listening or family members that might want to know where to get started. But I remember Steve, after he retired, was looking for something to challenge him, occupy him, stimulate him, things like that. And he decided to go into metal forging. And initially his response or his rationale to me was like, I'm going to go out there and I'm just going to, smash the shit out of this metal, and that'll be therapeutic. And I remember him coming in at some point with this like gnarled, twisted piece of metal. And he's like, that approach isn't working. And I kind of looked at him and I said, oh, really? And it was, there was kind of something in that for both of us that we could draw from that. And what he's finding is that it's maybe with a lot of arts is you have to be present in the moment. He said, you really have to pay attention to the color of the metal and the angle that you're hitting it with and what you want to manipulate it. So you have to be very present. You have to be very grounded. And that's been the therapeutic piece for him, as well as coming out with something, hey, look at, I kind of produced this. And so I think just being in the moment and tapping into how you're compelled to go in a direction with a song or a color or whatever, I would imagine would be kind of a peaceful experience maybe sometimes.
Certainly cathartic, right? Just to be able to, we talk about like even mindful walking, right? Like that was one thing my doctor always talked to me about, was when you go for a walk, just be like mindful of all the things that are involved in it. And being mindful really gives you that, like, a great place to start from, because you're really concentrating rather than looking at the end goal. I think a lot of times for myself in the military, when I was doing something, it was always with the end goal, like I'm going to do this course because I want that qualification. And I never really took the time to sit with that and understand why I wanted to do it. And maybe that was my own ego that got in the way of me on more than one occasion from it, right? So yeah, I really like that example, because again, it's like you can't just sit there and hit it and think you're going to come up with something great. You know what I mean? You really got to immerse yourself in it.
Mm.
Well, that's interesting is, we're always working for a goal, and mission driven is a good term. There's nothing wrong with being driven by a mission. But a lot of these other things, they're process driven. It's the getting there that's the value. I think about, what did I have to do to set myself up for success in the military? And if you had to be somewhere at 7, well, undoubtedly the fastest guy in the platoon is going to run everyone into the ground. That's what the morning looks like. But how do you set yourself up for success? Probably some decent sleep, get up, shave, make sure your problems are going to go away, so you're showing up with the right gear. Whatever training you're supposed to do that day probably has some special thing you got to bring. These are the ways you set yourself up for success. How do you set yourself up to be creative? Like, if you know you're going to go do something today from the art perspective that starts at 8 a.m, what's the before 8 that gets you ready to do your best?
I mean, for myself, really, I really have to become mindful of why I'm doing it. If I go into an audition or if I go into anything like that and I've just been like, I learned the words, I'm ready to go. It doesn't work like that. I really have to take that time to center myself and come from that place of like, I'm in the character, if that makes sense. I'm not just reading these lines so someone will see me as that. I have to understand the context of it, and I have to be present in that context in order for it to even come out as truth, right? Like, we've watched enough stuff. You watch people and their performances, especially when it comes to like movies, and you're like, yeah, that seems kind of flat or whatever. You can critique it at the end of the day, but there's a real difference in someone who is like, I'm taking this role on and my end goal is to be this person, is to be in this, right? So I have to come from a place of being prepared, first of all, but also being centered in myself before I can get that out there. Even before we go on stage, or if I'm going to be on camera, like, I have to sit there, take a few deep breaths, center myself, and just be in the moment before I can get that out. If I'm just there, I'm like, oh, now it's time to regurgitate the laundry list. It never works. It never comes off as real. It always comes off as super rehearsed, and it doesn't help me in trying to achieve my goal.
So if you look back, though, when Master Corporal Hawkyard was doing his business, when he's doing int briefing to some officers he doesn't know, was any of that an act?
I would say there was always an element of, the whole world's a stage, right? You got to sell it. You got to be that person. You got to take that role on. So a drama teacher told me years ago, we're all actors in some way, shape, or form. You're taking on that role, right? So now I'm going to be the int NCO. Okay, well, I'm going to be the int NCO. I know nothing about intelligence briefings, but I do know what it's like to convey information properly. So I'm going to break on that. So there was an element of, yeah, this is who I am. I got to sell you the plan. When I got promoted to sergeant and I'm in front of troops and they got to look at me like, who's this crazy old guy yelling things at me? Well, I had to make them believe that I had that experience. They had to understand that, right? And how else do you do that? Just the name alone doesn't help. We all knew NCMs that had all these nice badges on them, but they weren't the best at their job, right? It didn't mean you were amazing because you had all the courses. You know what I'm saying? So there's an element of acting, and there's also an element of, if I'm prepared, that acting or taking that role on is going to come across, and people are going to know who I am.
Yeah, I think back to how many times was I leading a patrol or an element of something, trying to portray confidence that I didn't have, trying to not be geographically embarrassed in front of people, which really means lost. And I've thought about that a number of times, and also when I met you before, when we were having a chat, is like, there is some element of some performative aspect of assuming a new role. The second someone says, hey, you know what, you're the section commander now, you might have been filling that role, acting, as we literally call it, acting master corporal, acting sergeant. And all of a sudden now you are. So you're not acting anymore. You gotta be that thing. I wonder if any of that is still present for you in your current work.
Oh, absolutely. I acted all the time, man. I was always being put into some role that I wasn't qualified for, or somebody else wasn't there. I just seemed to be the guy. Maybe because that I could just feign confidence very well, and that's why people took me on in those things. Set that aside as a joke, but you're correct. You show up in an organization, people don't know who you are, and you're given this title. Well, you have to figure out what it means to convey that, right? You really have to understand that. It's not just saying words. It's like, what about it? What about my actions is going to get these people to believe that I know what I'm doing?
Okay, I'm going for a really deep question here for both of you guys. We're talking about taking on that persona or acting in a role, and what comes to mind for me is fake it till you make it. Was there or is there a component for each one of you in your recovery with PTSD, or trying to, I know for Steve, when he transitioned out of the military, he thought he had to act like a civilian, so he was trying to fake it till he make it. Or even with his OSI, trying to get out of bed every day, and he maybe particularly was having a hard time struggling, but he would have to, put it on kind of thing and act through the day or whatever. Is there a component of that at all for either transition or recovery with mental health injury?
If I had any of that, it was certainly trying to sound like a civilian, and I would change my language to try and, be less offensive. And in the act of doing that, probably come across even worse. Yeah, trying to, who's the new me? And yet, let's be honest, 20 years, formative years of your life from like 17 to 37, I knew what was in that mirror. I think there's going to be an element of that when I'm, 77. I think one thing where there's a bit of performative, it's not, sometimes you don't know you're doing it though. I find a lot of people, including me, when I first got that first breath of air, the first program I went on that showed me a little bit of a path forward, I then felt I was fixed. It's like, oh, this is good. I've got it licked now because I've caught my breath for like an afternoon or something like that, right? And this worked for me. Therefore, Ryan, you have to do this program. That was probably one of my biggest failings, is I had tried some things that didn't work. So then I took the idea, well, those don't work then. And then I had a couple of other things that worked for me. Well, then they work for you, and you're not trying if you don't go on this program and get that dog and do this therapy. I put myself in this professor role before I really should have.
Ryan, what about you? I'm curious.
I've been guilty of that myself, where it's a one-size-fits-all approach to things. And one thing I've noticed, I've been out for 5 years now, so in that time, that it just doesn't work that way, right? Everybody responds differently, especially when you come out of the system, because the system's meant to get a standard across in one way, right? So everybody's got to meet that standard. And, when I think back on how I interacted with people in the forces, people learn differently. Something might register with you right away. Like I was very good at just memorizing stuff and regurgitating it. So I think that was very beneficial for me in that environment. But then coming out and knowing, like, for a bit I worked with homeless vets, and then being like, I was in school for social work. So again, now I'm learning models of approach to people with very different backgrounds to mine, sometimes with traumas that I don't even understand. And, I couldn't call on that stuff that I used before because it just wouldn't work. And I really would have to, like you say, fake it till I made it, right? Because you had to find that what would work with these people. I think in anything, when you come out for vets, when you come out of there, as we sort of talked about before, is finding that purpose is very difficult. And it's going to come across in all kinds of different ways to people. You might find it in writing or whatever it is, right? There's no one DS answer to any of this stuff.
What's therapeutic about playing a part that isn't real?
You have to find your idea of who that character is, right? You don't just pick up a script, read it, memorize it, and say the lines. You have to understand. You have to build, like, that's what I do, is I build this whole world for myself to understand who they are, why they act the way they do, why they are in the situation that they're in. because you could be called upon to be a villain, and meanwhile you don't have any parallels to who this individual is, right? But you have to find that humanity in it because you're there to tell the story. So you really have to fake being that person in order to get that point across. And you can't fake being that person if you can't find one element of commonality where you can say, well, I know myself in that situation. We're all the villain at some point, right? We all make decisions that are beneficial to ourselves, but will deny somebody else their truth. But you might not think of yourself as the villain, right? When I think of being in Afghanistan, I'm like, oh, well, I was there for pretenses that were morally just. And the situations that I were in were at times a direct counter to that, where I would be involved with an individual, and this individual is doing something that, I could judge them and say it was against what we were doing there, but I'm not I'm not them. I'm not their culture. I don't understand that. Right. So I am pushing my values on them, which is not real. You know what I mean? Like that's going against myself. And if someone was to come into my backyard and tell me that I had to change everything the way that I lived because it was wrong, I don't know how I would react. Right. So I could find that commonality between myself and the people that I considered enemies at one point. So again, it's like being able to find that point of humanity, even though I'm not that person and I'm faking who they are, it helps me find the character, find the role, and purvey that out to somebody or to an audience and tell a story.
So I'm trying to get at, for my own understanding, is, why are so many of these people finding success in the arts in terms of, well, quite frankly, they're doing well, and they're doing well at it. They're getting healthier through it. It's at least what it seems to me. But I'm wondering, is this something we grow into? Are we just older? Did we learn it? Or do you think that creativity was always there? I'm just thinking, like, the average, you think about your 21-year-old average person in the platoon, 34 guys about to go into a gas hut. I'm not thinking that I'm standing beside the next poet.
Yeah. It's in humans to create, right? We're the only species that will pay money to watch other versions of us do something that we already know we do, right? Like, I'm going to watch a movie about two couples fighting. Well, I know what that is. Why am I paying money for this? Because I like watching it, right? I think that we all have it in us to create in some way. Like, the creative things that I saw from troops that served under me in certain scenarios, where I'm just like, where did you come up with that? What in your brain was able to see through those lines and make something like that? Like, we are creative at heart, right? So I think the military, because the big point of it is to conform in some ways, right? Like, you conform to be a member of this, you're working together as a team for a common goal. We lose that. And then when we come out of it, you're kind of like, well, you're playing with all kinds of thoughts, right? You're trying to say, hey, listen, what did I just go through? How do I make sense of it? What are things that I've seen there that I would like to, bring back into light? And I think that's one of the things that we forget as military members is, we are human first. So we have that ability to create, and we look at that ability to create in others, and we take that in. It's part of the human condition.
You're talking about meaning making, and when you chatted before, you brought something up that was fascinating. Could you talk about, I think particularly there were authors, a lot of authors of very famous works were actually veterans potentially trying to make meaning. Can you talk about that again a little bit?
Yeah, totally. I use Tolkien, right? Like, everybody loves Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. Like, that guy was in the trenches in the First World War, right? Those stories of friendship, like, he drew on those in order to write those books. Where are you going to get that kind of friendship from? I don't know in ways of outside of the army where you're going to find that. Maybe firefighters in some ways, because, you're putting your life on the line together in such a way. But, like, having that experience from that, he created this entire world, and that is still to today is there. The ancient Greek plays, we talked about this as well. There's a book called The Theater of War for people that are interested in picking something up. And this gentleman, Brian Dory, he's talking about how, the Greek classics were written by vets, right? And they were performed, the Greek chorus. You couldn't be in the Greek chorus unless you were a member of society, right? And how do you become a member, a citizen? You serve in the military.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been there, at least in terms of like us Westerners. It's sort of a foundational element of our literature and our art.
If you go through a place like, say, Parliament or, even U.S. Congress, have a look at what most of the paintings are, and they're of conflict. And I look back at, having not served in Vietnam, obviously, where's the biggest storytelling of the Vietnam experience? It's rock music. There was pro-war music, there was anti-war music, there was, distrust in government music. And for the Canadian context, the best thing I could call of an artifact of World War I is a poem. You think of that, Flanders Fields. Like, did John McCrae really intend on writing this timeless piece that we'd be constantly referring to and repeating for a century? Maybe that was what he was coming up with. Or maybe he's just writing what he thought and saw at that time. Like, it was a recording. He was putting data on paper to a degree. So what do you think might be a lasting art piece out of the conflicts we were in?
I don't know.
You've mentioned some plays, and there's some other ones too, like Contact Unload, one that I know of came from out west. These gents wound up performing this, to royalty in the UK and whatnot. I've noticed a number of plays and smaller, 8 to 10 minute ones that have come out of our conflicts.
Yeah. I would like to see that. I would like to see our generation, like, we're just starting to phase out now. The next 5-10 years, there's going to be no more of us left in the forces. So maybe we'll start to see some of that more. I know there's a lot of people on the talking circuits who are getting out there and we're telling these like real life stories and sound bites, across social media. And that's just how the world that we live in now, right? I hope to see some more. I would love to see something that's based off our experiences. You know what I'm saying? But I would hope that Canadians would find an interest in these stories in a way where they're supported and they're, one failing that we had was, even though we did we did a 2-week run of our play here in Toronto, it didn't get the legs that we were hoping it would. And the theater community here didn't pick up on it the same way, but everyone that came to see it loved it. Right. And the things that people that came up to us after and talked about, we had one gentleman who was an interpreter, an Afghan interpreter that was there, and he was like in tears at the end of it. We had all kinds of vets come through and see it. We would like to put it on again, but that's a time for another conversation. My thing with it always is, I can watch all these war movies, and the ones that always stick out to me, like Oliver Stone's, like you watch Platoon, right? And that guy, that came from lived reality, right? That's not just a story. That's his war that he brought forward, and the dichotomy between the two section commanders kind of thing, right? Something you just can't convey unless you've been there.
Back in the day when you were serving, if someone introduced you, it would be, this rank, this name, qualified in this, going to teach you X. What's the elevator pitch on Ryan now? Like, if someone meets you and says, tell me about yourself, how do you describe yourself to them today? Who are you?
Well, the first I always lead with, I'm a vet, right? Because I'm Ryan, I'm a veteran. I served 20 years in the military. I saw action in Afghanistan, and I've moved on from that. And now I'm an actor, I'm a photographer, I'm a storyteller, and I'm a Canadian. That's what I think that I would like to get that across as best as I can.
Mm-hmm. So Ryan, I'm curious if there's somebody listening who this is kind of piquing interest. What words of encouragement, how does somebody get started if they kind of want to tap into that creative piece?
Just start. Just pick something. If you've always wanted to paint, just go out there. It's not going to be amazing at first, or maybe it is. I don't know. But you have to put the time in order to really create your own voice and make your own make your own art, right? Yeah, there's a great book called The Artist's Way. It's been around forever. It's a really I used it myself, and it just gives some really great insights into how to fine-tune that creative muscle. Because if you haven't used it for a long time, it might be dusty. You have to find ways to make it better yourself. So my parting advice to anybody is just pick something, get involved, get out there, and don't feel that your work isn't good enough, because that doesn't That's not real. You know what I mean? Like art is, like you said earlier, it's subjective. It's your expression, and no one can take away your expression from you.
Is there some element to this though, Ryan? Like if someone wants to get started, if you want to do art, like go to art, be around art, go check out recording artists that you've never heard of, something that's local. Is that kind of what you mean by start?
Yeah, exactly. Get out there, see what other people are doing, find things that inspire you, things that you're interested in. It could be like, you know, you could be into jewelry making for, you know what I mean? For whatever it is, and you see the beauty in that and you want to try it, well, try it. You know, don't just say, I wish I could do that, or I wish I could be creative. Because I used to say that myself until I started doing stuff and being like, oh, I actually like this. And there's actually a platform here I can work with. I've had a few vets I've spoken to being like, well, I'm not an artist. I'd be like, well, neither am I. I'm just a guy that wants to get out there and experience as much as life as I can. That's how I look at it. So you can find art in anything. You can find it in cooking. You can find it in, you know, like lawn care, whatever it is. You just immerse yourself in something and give yourself the space to fail and try.
So speaking of that, what are you on now and what's your next piece?
Oh, what am I on right now? I've taken a bit of a step back from auditioning for the last few months because I've been helping a family business out with my wife, and I'm hoping to get back into getting back to auditions this year. And I'm writing. I'm always trying to write something. I'm just trying to get something together, and I would like to have my own work on stage at some point and to be in more movies. I would love to be just out there just doing stuff.
And I think as we wrap up, you know, one thing I'd like, obviously our community is largely the veteran and family community, but, you know, for a person still in uniform, without doing something that would get them fired, what kind of art do you think they could dabble in while they're still serving to kind of scratch this itch?
As long as it didn't, you know, go against the code of service discipline, whatever it is, man. You know what I mean? Like you could, you could try anything. I was still in when I started doing these my acting lessons, and just remember that you're still a representative of the forces, and there's rules that come with that. And as long as you're not in violation of that, just get out there and get creative.
Ryan, it was such a pleasure getting to know you a little bit better. I hope we stay in contact. I'm keeping my eyes open for your name up in lights on theater marquees. So just thank you so much for having this conversation with us.
Thank you very much, guys. It was great.
Yeah, Ryan, I really appreciate it. I think it's such a good message because there's health in that, right? And I think of, you know, you are who you are when you join. You're looking for what's in that brochure, and good if you find it. I just want those people to know, you know, 47 years old down the road, you might have other interests, and those interests might be your best medicine. So thank you, Ryan, for joining us on another episode of Mind Beyond the Mission.
Thanks, guys.
Just going to give another shout out to Courtney Wright, our internal producer at Atlas, and for Pop-Up Podcasting, who always makes us sound great. And if you're listening to this podcast, please rate the podcast, leave a comment. We want to get this out to veterans and families so that they can learn about different topics and hear from great guests like Ryan Hawkyard. So thanks, folks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Mind Beyond the Mission.
If this conversation resonated with you or helped you in any way, I encourage you to subscribe to Mind Beyond the Mission wherever you listen to your podcasts, so you'll be the first to know when our next episode comes out.
And if you know someone who might relate to what we've shared or could find it helpful, please feel free to send it their way. We're all on the same team.
Plus, we'd love to hear what other topics you'd be interested in us exploring in future episodes. Brian and I have a lot of ideas and subjects we plan to dive into, but you, the listener, have probably experienced or thought of topics that haven't crossed our minds yet.
Please reach out if this is the case. We're on social media at Atlas Veterans CA on most platforms, so please feel free to tweet at us, send us a message, or leave a review on this episode, and let us know what else you'd like to hear us talk about.
Brian, it's always a pleasure having these important conversations with you. Looking forward to next time.
You bet, Laryssa. Take it easy.